The Fortnite World Cup Qualifiers are sometimes referred to as the peak of Fortnite competitive, but was it actually as good as people say it was, or is this all just nostalgia? Before April of 2019, the majority of the already insanely large population of Fortnite players had only had a glimpse at the competitive side of the game. Many of the large tournaments before this date, such as the summer and fall skirmishes and the ESL Katowice Royale, were invite-only or held in difficult-to-attend parts of the world. However, the Winter Royale of 2018 was the world's first real look at online Fortnite and what it could be, and it was open to anyone in EU and NA. And it also had the Infinity Blade. This was the first time there were online qualifiers in Fortnite that led to a finals event with a large prize pool that was open to anyone, but Epic were only getting started there. From then on, there was a slew of other tournaments such as the Share the Love, Scallywag, and Lux Cups. These events were received very well by the community, and I have fond memories of not qualifying for any of them. Once the $30 million prize pool was announced for the Fortnite World Cup and its qualifiers, it was like nothing the Fortnite community had ever seen. 10 weekly qualifiers, $1 million prize pools each week, alternating between solos and duo game modes, a chance for players from every region to qualify and solidify themselves a slot at the World Cup finals, and a chance at winning $3 million. This was the first time that players could qualify for a LAN event in Fortnite from their home, and with that insanely large prize pools to play for, it's safe to say people were excited. This environment created incredible depth of competition, some of which had never been seen before in a major tournament. In solos, if you came top 8, you'd qualify for the finals in New York, and if you just made top 2,000 out of the 3,000 players in the weekly finals, you'd get some earnings. Just imagine if you're playing the weekly solo cash cup and you'd made a top 2,000 just to get some earnings. This made every match of the qualifiers tense and mean something to each player. Looking back at it, the games weren't that stacked, on average with around 25 moving, and a lot of the games not really having any storm surge until the final lobbies. Despite this, you knew that every player in that lobby was playing to the fullest of their abilities and trying to do what they really thought was correct strategy to climb up the leaderboards. The huge prize pools and high stakes created a tournament that caused nerves on the day of and brought excitement to the players. However, one thing that competitive players weren't thinking about is how this would impact the future of the game and the aftermath of these kind of tournaments. With the $30 million prize pool of the World Cup, expectations were set by the players. To anyone over the age of 15, it was clear that this was not sustainable. It just wouldn't be a viable business strategy to continue to spend $100 million a year on Fortnite competitive. The return on that investment just isn't there. So as the time moves on, prize pools have slowly reduced, and now they're at the point where Epic seems comfortable with them. $5 million per FNCS and 4 of these per year. Good cash cup prize pools that aren't just free cash. Personally, I think where they're at right now is a perfect balance for sustainability for the future. However, the issues lie where there's no prize pool. The recent Open and Aura Scrims test should show that the player base isn't interested in playing seriously without an incentive. In most competitive games, there would be ladders and scrims because they enjoy the game, the competitive scene, and most importantly, they want to practice being competitive. In Fortnite, if there's not a reasonable prize pool, the tournament is considered a waste of time. Players will load in, W key, and not care about the leaderboards, where they place, and worst of all, ridicule other players who are happy about placing well in these tournaments that aren't as maximally competitive as they think they are. The expectation has been set that these tournaments should have incredibly large prize pools, and that was started back in the World Cup qualifiers and generally the 2019 season in general, and that is difficult to undo. Remember what I said, top 2,000 makes money in the World Cup qualifiers, specifically in EU. So that's 2/3 of the people who make it to the weekly finals. For anyone unsure, the first day of each weekly qualifier was open to anyone in Champions League in Arena. Then, from that day, you had to place in the top 3,000 to make it to day 2, and in that day 2, that's where all of the prizing and qualification opportunities were. And as I said, you need to be top 2,000 to make money in EU. As we now know, there's a massive difference between the top 100 players and the top 3,000 players, meaning that on that second day of qualifiers, there are a lot of, well, just not that great players in there, which is good and bad. Since the average skill level generally wasn't that good, in particular in comparison to what a tournament would be now, this gave a lot of players hope that they could make earnings and qualify, which honestly they could if they were remotely good at the game at this point. But similarly, this hope made some of the community feel like they were entitled to money for simply just playing the tournament. Let's take last season's FNCS. A lot of the players were frustrated when the money was taken out of the qualifiers and semi-finals and all of the prizing went on to the finals. Objectively, this is 100% the best option as it gives the best of the best players more opportunities to make a living from gaming. Realistically, most of the players who were upset about this change were players who just made semi-finals, usually on consistency, and felt entitled to the money that used to be there. This expectation really was set in the World Cup qualifiers, and the general community has struggled to get rid of it throughout the years. And as we know now, we do custom stages to qualify for large events or where large prize pools are most of the time, such as again the FNCS finals where it's 100 of the best players rather than 3,000 of the best players. This is just because it is more competitive to go in a smaller number with higher quality players rather than just filling in with 3,000 of the best people. So the quality of the lobbies really were not maximized at this point. Since that time, the game has come a long way. Right now, the DreamHack and FNCS finals, both of which are probably the highest level of competition, are all custom stage tournaments with only 100 players or as close to 100 as possible. Not only that, the loot pool has changed significantly. Just look at the loot pool the last 3 seasons. Yes, this season has makeshifts and primals, but all of the overpowered and wacky items have been removed from the competitive playlists to create a better balance, except the bows. People often think back to the World Cup meta and say it was one of the best competitive metas we've had, and it was so fun. But in reality, there were ballers, the combat shotgun, RPGs, heavy snipers, grenade launchers, stinks, clingers, dynamite, boogie bomb, shockwaves, traps, porta rifts, oh, and we can't forget the drum gun introduced before week 5. Do you remember back to the mythic drum gun in chapter 2 season 2 and how it did 25 damage to the body with the 2 times headshot multiplier at that time? Well, the blue drum gun in week 5 of the World Cup did 27 damage to the body and 54 to the head. At this time, this was a controller player's dream. But even clicks on keyboard and mouse was carrying 2 of them and not carrying a shotgun. Competitively, this was one of the worst metas we've had. I mean, there weren't mechs, so it's not the worst. The mech's torping in! He's torping in! People have a ton of nostalgia about this meta, mainly because of the World Cup qualification system and the fact that they got to play in it. Not necessarily because it was a highly competitive meta. But speaking of the qualification system, was it any good? Well, no. There was only one way to qualify for the LAN finals in New York, and that was coming top 8 in solos and top 4 in duos in the weekly finals. And that was it. This was specific to whatever region you were on, but in smaller regions, such as NA West, they had to come first. And because OCE was so small, you could only qualify every 2nd week, and you had to win the tournament. Currently we have series points to ensure that consistent teams still have an opportunity to qualify for further stages, but back then if you didn't meet the threshold, you were out. There were players like Fuzzy in NA East who were the most consistent across all 10 weeks in his region but failed to make the threshold once, on 3 out of the 10 weeks being only 1 point shy of qualifying. That's 1 shotgun shot, 1 placement point, and it all makes the difference between a minimum of 50k and a maximum of 3 million at the World Cup. Despite the fact that the qualification system definitely could have been a lot more competitive and well thought out, it did one thing very, very well, and that was bring the hype.
Let's go!
Try. Holy shit.
But what is it? Does it mean 50 grand? Or
Yeah,
no?
it's guaranteed 50 grand. You know?
Ready? Here's the breakdown.
Every single week, teams either made the qualification threshold or they didn't. It was very easy to follow for players and viewers alike. Tuning into the broadcast once the games were finished to see who had made the cut was a regular occurrence for nearly every player, as this was when the final leaderboards were announced. Fortnite Tracker wasn't used anywhere near as much at this time, if at all if I remember correctly, so there was such a huge build up every single week. And if you were around at that time, you'll probably remember this song. The content that came from these qualifications was nothing short of masterpieces. Watching Bucky's qualification video makes me, a 27-year-old tin robot of a man, emotional. Watching Clix's video trying to analyze his fighting skill at the time, which was so much more primitive than even a huge majority of the competitive player base now. However, for this time, he was so far ahead of everyone. And somehow Snow even managed to become the YouTube algorithm for the last 2 years with his video. These moments are some of the best Fortnite Competitive has to offer, and it's the stories and emotions that come with these qualifications that make these videos so special. So how good were the Fortnite World Cup Qualifiers? They were pretty damn awesome. If we can so fondly remember back to a time when competitive had one of its most difficult to balance metas, the next World Cup with a competitive meta is going to be something to remember.